For those of us who are passionate gardeners and we spend our life gardening, and the garden that we end up creating is really our soul. The people we've known are all out there in the plants that they've shared with us and plants that we associate with them. And the places we've been, they're all out there. Oh, what a smell. I just love this thing. This is Clematis manchurica, which was actually collected in Mongolia by my friend Harlan Hammernick. Harlan was he and his wife started Bluebird Nursery in Clarkston, Nebraska. Anyway, he was a very dear friend of mine, and he collected many, many treasures. And this is one of his finest plants. So this is my kind of plant. There's not a plant you can point to that isn't a story. For example, on the waterfall, there are these little silvery tuffets. They're Dittany of Crete, and it's an oregano that comes from my ancestral island where my parents were born. And it's probably the most famous plant from Crete. And it's considered almost impossible to grow, not very hardy. And well, it grows on cliffs. Well, I have a little cliff, and so I thought, well, if I put it on the cliff there, in the bog there's a primrose from the Himalayas, and the yellow monkey flower that you see there, those are bona fide high mountain plants. The primrose grows up at 15,000 feet in the Himalayas. I've actually seen it there. And I grow lots of alpine plants. But more and more, what I sort of have brought an awareness to the rock garden community is that some of the best rock plants actually grow at low elevations. Plants from the steppe regions and from the Mediterranean region. So many of the plants in my garden are actually Mediterranean plants, and many of them are African plants. The nice thing about a rock garden is after you do it, it kind of settles down to a dull roar. And this one, I suppose if you had one thing you could compare a rock garden to, it would be a kaleidoscope, because it's so changing. It changes, it's constantly shifting, and things pop up and die down and bloom. And this is a hybrid that just appeared in my garden spontaneously, and I've left it because it's pretty spectacular. This one's called Kent Beauty. It's an old hybrid that was produced in England 50 or 60 years ago, and they all have a wonderful aroma when you touch them. This is one from Turkey that comes from southern Turkey, and it has lime green flowers. You'll see it has a trunk like a tree in here from the roots. They have great big roots underneath. This has been here for probably 20 years. And then there's some Nipophias. Those are the torch lilies. And this one is the most important medicinal Nipophia. It's harvested rather heavily in the country of Lesotho, and it's used for quite a number of different medicinal purposes. I'm really proud of it now because it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 flower heads coming into bloom right now. So this is one of my pride and joys down here. This is a Himalayan maidenhair fern. Some people would look at this and they'd say, this kind of looks like a weed patch. And of course, it does look a little like a weed patch, but needless to say, this is a mullein from, again, it comes from the Mediterranean. And it doesn't look like any other mullein because it has very finely divided leaves. But I just love this thing. So I've created this bed pretty much to show off it's such a delicate flower. And this is where I grow a lot of my woodland plants, which I'm very, very fond of. And then I have a little patch of succulents over here too. But this garden here is, most people think on the north side of their house, what would I grow there? Well, I'm growing probably 20 different kinds of ferns here. And then these little jack-in-the-pulpits. It's a jack-in-the-pulpit from China that comes from western China called Eurasia candidissimum, which I think is just an absolutely gorgeous flower. The back 40 of my garden is the dry part. When you have a half acre in Denver, you really can't water a half acre unless you're a millionaire. When we designed the garden, we decided to make this half of the garden unwatered. It has my collection of succulents that I take indoors. These verbascums, these mulleins with the big yellow flowers, are beautiful in the morning. This is actually a species that comes from a mountain in Turkey. The Turks call it Uludağ, but the ancient Greeks called it Olympus. It was the Bithynian Olympus, the Olympus of Asia Minor. But it certainly loves my garden, as you can see. I don't plant any of these, they just plant themselves. So that's part of my mission in my life, is to awake people to the fact that they're surrounded by the most marvelous creatures on earth that can turn sunlight into carbohydrate, and that clean the air and do all these marvelous things, and they're quietly and peacefully performing for us. I think I've preserved my sort of childish and childlike wonder. I just never cease to be shocked at how you plant a seed or you plant a plant, and it just takes off, and it keeps morphing. And for me, that watching those transformations from day to day is, I wake up in the morning, it's like Christmas, and what's blooming today, and I run around, and that is something which I think lies at the heart of all gardening. As you can see, the rock garden has come into its glory. This is the time of year when you don't really have to talk much about it. It talks for itself, and it talks in a lot of colors, and it's really fun. The mountain plants, have spent all winter under the snow, and then in the springtime, when they finally get into their swing of things, they do their thing and they all bloom. Really, late May and June are when rock gardens are at their peak. If you remember all the purple daphnes, that was just a mound of purple a month ago when you were here last. But now the white daphnes, this is one from Greece and Turkey again. I've seen that on Mount Olympus in both Turkey and Mount Olympus in Greece. And it's on almost every mountain in Greece. It's Daphne oleoides. Most of the plants have done really well this year, but the saxifrages aren't blooming as much as usual. This one is blooming pretty well, but I have clumps of this all over the hillside, and half of them don't even have a flower on them. So it's funny how the tulips went crazy this year, and the irises, but the saxifrages, next year might be a better saxifrage year, but they're still pretty nice, because this whole hillside I have lots of them, and of course they're the classic rock garden plant. Some of my greatest little treasures are tucked away on the backside here, where a lot of people never come. One of the most unusual plants in the garden is tucked in that rock there. That's believe it or not, that's a little petunia relative. It's called Petunia patagonica, and we have beautiful specimens of the Botanic Gardens growing in full sun on top of in the step garden on these beds. So I think it really would like more sun, but it seems to do fine in that little crevice, and it's bloomed for me several years. This is a fern called a Chilanthes. At least that's what the name has always traditionally been. I think they're trying to change it, but they grow in very dry areas in the southwest. You'll even see them growing with saguaros, various kinds of Chilanthes and Pelleas and things in that group. This is one that's pretty much restricted to Colorado. It grows in a few neighboring states, but it's most abundant here. This is one of my favorite vignettes right now. It's kind of patriotic with red, white, and blue. But it also kind of symbolizes what I'm up to. This is the Colorado columbine. We had the Colorado Native Plant Society touring yesterday, and of course our state flower was de rigueur, but it's our local native. And then here we have two natives of Southern Europe and Asia. The bright red peony is Paeonia peregrina, which grows in the Balkans, and it also grows in Greece, of course, which is where my family comes from. And but the red flower is from Turkey, so that you can see the Greeks and the Turks get along quite well here in the garden. And it's actually was discovered a little more than 100 years ago by Sprenger. It's Tulipa sprengeri. There you can see in front of the waterfall, there's an iris. That's a Siberian iris. And there's that tree over there. That's a Chinese fringe tree. And we have an American fringe tree, which is similar, but is much smaller. The Chinese fringe tree can get up to 30 feet tall, even taller than that, and the flowers are incredibly fragrant. You can probably pick up that scent. It's almost like a lilac scent. This is, they call them blue stars, and this is one from Missouri that's quite rare, and it's pretty local in the Midwest. But it sure loves my garden. It's been self-sowing and producing some little babies here and there, but it loves that icy blue color. Is really gorgeous, and it blooms for a very long time. And fortunately, some of the poppies decided to grow near it. That's the horn poppy, which is one of my sort of signature weeds. And the combination, I think, has been delightful. And then, of course, the pink gas plant behind. Gas plants are one of my really favorite groups of plants. And you'll see them in almost every bed because they kind of plant themselves around. They're in the citrus family. This is an early one. But most of my verbascums won't. You can see they haven't produced bloom stalks yet. They won't really get into the action until July and August. So the blue flax I scattered seed and it's starting to come up. This is our native blue flax, and it makes a wonderful combination with the poppies. This is the cliff rose, which is a native of the Colorado Plateau, all the canyon country in Utah and western Colorado, and in Arizona you'll find this, and it blooms, as you can see, in the early summer. Edward Abbey in Desert Solitaire dedicated an entire chapter to this. You know, it is such an inspiring plant when you see it in nature because it makes these incredibly gnarly sort of bonsai shapes on the cliffs, and then it blooms pretty much all summer. It blooms on and off all summer, but it has a big flush right now. You can see it's loaded with even more buds. And what's amazing is that it has a very sweet fragrance. It's in the rose family. You can see it's kind of like a rose, but it's totally not spiny. And the other thing that's so wonderful about this is that the leaves are incredibly aromatic. This is just a fantastic plant, and it's so sad. In Denver, I've only seen this in 2 or 3 gardens, and yet it's one of our most beautiful native plants. And it's the sort of thing that ought to be used in median strips and all sorts of places because it needs no water. It comes from almost a desert environment. But what a beautiful flower that is. And you can see it's the tall-bearded iris season is coming on us quickly. I have a mixture of tall-bearded and old-fashioned irises. Tall-bearded iris are a phenomenon that came about in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Those are tall-bearded iris back there, and this is a really nice specimen here. And they're the largest of the bearded iris are these tall hybrids. And what happened is that the chromosomes doubled on the old wild types of irises, and the doubled chromosomes produce much bigger flowers. And when that happened with a few plants, they were selected, they found some of these that happened, they began crossing those, and from those crosses, they've developed a phenomenal variety of flowers, and they have these huge flowers. As you can see, they call them the poor man's orchid. Although if you want to buy some of the new hybrids, you better not be a poor man, because they're not that cheap. But at any rate, they're pretty glorious plants. That's not a tall-bearded iris. That's one of the old diploid irises that are closely related, but they have half the number of chromosomes. They have extreme vigor, though. The old varieties are closer to nature, so to speak. And as they've hybridized these old tall-bearded irises into these new forms, they've lost a little bit of that vigor, so you have to kind of baby them more. The old Germanica type, the old old-fashioned bearded irises that and these have been become unfashionable with the iris, some of the iris growers. And of course, there are people who specialize in growing these. And down at Chatfield, we actually have a collection of about 500 species and old-fashioned selections. It's probably one of the best collections in any public garden. And I'm really proud of how they maintain that. The staff down there have done a fantastic job. This is another one of these old-fashioned irises. This is iris, a form of iris variegata, and you can see it has the kind of variegated falls. This is a hybrid that was produced from variegata probably 100 years ago or so, and you can find this in old houses around Denver. Well, it's certainly June, but you know what's interesting. I suspect what would be most interesting for anybody who views these videos would be the fact that even though both videos might have been taken almost at the same time, the gardens will not be the same because each year something different will usually come out. And some plants will be particularly happy one year, and then the next year they may kind of wait, and then it kind of depends on how the weather's been. And because we had all those nice rains, certain plants have really, shown up. For example, that yellow thing is a basket of gold cousin. The classic basket of gold blooms in April and May. This is a late one. And I got that from Michael Bronner of Harlequin's Garden in Boulder. And he just loves that thing. And I can see why now, because it blooms for a long time. But that funny little plant is a new one. It's a helichrysum from the islands of Greece. Amorgos in particular is an island north of Crete, and that's what it's named for, Amorginum, but it grows in a handful of other islands. And I'm just astonished at how hardy it's been. So that it came through last winter where we had damage on some items. And of course this is a Daphne here. This is Daphne oleoides, which is the commonest Daphne in Greece and in Turkey, and I've seen that both in Greece and in Turkey. It's almost every mountain you go to, there'll be masses of it, and I only have one little specimen right now, but that's enough. It connects me back to, the Eastern Mediterranean and my ancestral roots. So there's all these little gems. This is another one of my favorite plants. This is a meadow rue, and meadow rues rarely have petals like this one, or petaloid segments. And this is a special one from the Mediterranean that usually they're just powder puffs of stamens, like I have some elsewhere that have them. But there's a purple salvia that's tucked by the rock there, and that comes from Morocco. And that was introduced to horticulture by my colleague Mike Kinchin. Then we have what I call our triumphs. Triumphs are when you do something that you really don't intend to do that turns out to be pretty fantastic. See that little monkey flower by the water there? That's actually grown as an annual and sold locally, and I don't know who on earth would possibly grow it because it needs water, but I had the right spot for it, and it's actually from South America, and it grows along streams in Argentina and Chile, and I've seen it there, and it usually comes in bright orange or red. And these are hybrids that have been produced, and I love the colors are so spectacular, and the flowers are about twice as large as they are in nature. And I put that in last year thinking this will be nice for a year, but it came back. There's a campanula that's never performed quite like that before on the wall. That comes from the Adriatic Sea. It grows on both sides, and it's a particularly nice specimen this year, Campanula portenschlagiana. The pond has been a little more fun this year because I have fish. I had fish in them for years and years and years, and eventually we didn't, and now we have fish again, and they make a difference. They've been in there for about a month. Oh, look at the gas plant with the rose behind it. Yeah, that's I need to prune out that dead branch of the rose, but that's a nice vignette. This time of year it's the gas plant, and there's the Thalictrum. You saw the white flowered one that had petaloids segments. This doesn't have petals, it just has those big anthers that stick out. This is one that comes from, I believe this may actually be a Himalayan one. There's a European one that looks a little like this as well. Yeah, there's more of the gas plant. There's a lot of gas plant in this garden because it self-sows all over the place. It grows in exposed areas where it's unwatered. It grows here in this bed where it gets water, and it grows everywhere. One of the great plants. Yeah, we always seem to come back to the pond. In a garden like this, we call them, the plantsman type garden. It goes back really to the late Middle Ages when people started growing things for more than just their medicinal or edible properties. The first people started growing plants for their flowers. we just got curious about them, grew all different kinds of things, and not necessarily pretty things, just interesting plants. And that's kind of the tradition that I belong to. And some of my favorite plants are kind of homely, and nobody would notice or care except me, and a lot of little ferns and little things like that. So, for gardens, for most gardeners, I say the longer you garden, the more a garden really becomes a companion, and it develops all sorts of little characteristics that you learn to appreciate. And most visitors come in and they look for the color and they look for this and that, but you look for all sorts of little things that other people would never notice.